portion of the conversation later on in the afternoon, in the hour, you can raise your hand, and Natra here will be able to unmute you, and you can ask any question that you want to. But first of all, thank you very much for joining. So this session is part of an initiative organized by Hyper, which is IFPMA's Healthcare Youth Perspectives Empowered initiative. And we are here set up as a platform to try to mobilize, equip, and connect young representatives across the biopharmaceutical industry, and aiming in empowering them to increase their exposure and understanding of global health issues. By doing so, this really leverages and reinforces the culture of networking and enables young professionals to share their stories and learn from each other. This session is part of International Youth Day, which happened back in August. 12th of August was International Youth Day. And we really wanted to take the opportunity to have a discussion on what are some of the key challenges and trends that we're seeing across the industry as a lot of our employers move to a hybrid environment, and particularly around the issues and topics of career development and mentorship and those informal learning opportunities that were very kind of present and obvious during face-to-face work setup, but that may have slightly shifted now that we're moved to more of a hybrid environment. So we have a great panel here with you, with us today, and the panel is composed of Esther Anyango. So she's a project manager with Africa Health Business and has recently transitioned from the Kenyan Association of Pharmaceutical Industry, and is also part of the technical part of the Women's in Science and Education Mentorship Program. So very nice to have you, Esther. Then we have Ben Thompson, who's Vice President of CMC and Non-Clinical Regulatory Affairs at GSK. And last but not least, Lara Martinez-Gonzalez, who's Global Head of Talent Strategy at AstraZeneca. And I'm Alessandro Lasdins. I work at GSK in my day-to-day, but I'm currently seconded to IFPMA in the Vaccines and Regulatory Policy team. So, I would like to start maybe by having a couple opening thoughts by each of the panelists, and I'll start with Lara. So Lara, please, what are some of the key challenges, in your role as head of kind of strategy for development at AstraZeneca? What are some of the key challenges and opportunities that you're being faced with at the moment in attracting and maintaining talent in your organization?
Thank you, Alice. I'm very excited to be here today. And that's a big question, right? I was thinking today that basically what's going on is that the rules of the game are changing. And now we need to design new techniques and new strategies to really win that game. And the game basically is, how do we find the right talent at the right moment to make sure that we deliver the products and the services that the pharma industry needs to work on. So I think one of the biggest challenges and opportunities that we have today is the increased mobility and flexibility for our talent. This is allowing us to really reach out to people all over the world that we may haven't been able to tap into before. And at the same time, it creates a lot of competitiveness between all the pharma industry to really find that talent and making sure that they choose us and they don't choose some of our peers, right? So I think there is a lot of things to consider there in terms of how do we design our workspace and our ways of working to really untap that incredible potential that may prefer to work in a remote environment versus like the traditional face-to-face that we have been used to in the past. So creating a lot of opportunities and challenges there. People is talking about the war for talent. I don't like to use the term war. I think it's a bit more like more positive than that. I think it's really like trying to captivate the hearts and the minds of the most talented employees around there. There's also something going on around, especially in the pharma industry. If we think around attracting people that is digital natives and everything related with artificial intelligence and information technology and so on, like the most talented people may not think of pharma as the first election on their career. They may think about companies that are born in Silicon Valley, and they prefer to go to California, to maybe Switzerland, right, where most of the pharma companies are in Europe. So there is a bit of reputation there in terms of starting to demonstrate like pharma is definitely a very technological and interesting industry to captivate those hearts and minds. And on the other side, talking about reputation as well, pharma has had kind of a negative reputation in the past. And I think that during the last couple of years, there has been a shift there in which we can actually demonstrate the value that we have in to support like public health issues around the world. So I think this is actually helping us to really attract people with a purpose, people that really wants to make a difference in our environment and in our society. So that's both a challenge and an opportunity in itself. And there are a couple more that I can talk about. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that, I mean, it's definitely fascinating. I think that the element of geographical shift in terms of the potential of where your workforce comes from is huge. And I think we'll follow up a little bit of that with Esther later on. But something that I thought was quite interesting that you just said was around the trustworthiness of and the kind of reputation of our industry more globally. And we've seen that over COVID, there's been maybe a bit of an uptick in terms of the reputation. And you know that might help in terms of recruitment, because people get attracted or think about our industry. You know, AstraZeneca was front center of newspapers for a long time when the vaccines were coming out, and I think that's you know a really positive thing. So maybe if you can spend a second or a minute or so just thinking about how you talk about retention. You know, what are some of the issues that you're facing in terms of retention, and that comes with some of the opportunities that are being given once you're in. You know, you talked a lot about these great opportunities to attract people, but what are the opportunities that you see to keep people in the industry?
Great question. So definitely, the biggest opportunity that we have for retention right now is because we are starting to go into unexplored territories. We just think specifically about vaccines and the new technologies that we have learned a lot about in the last couple of years. There is a world to explore there. So that's fascinating, right? Like they were already talking about certain vaccines that we can develop for HIV and similar pathologies that we have had for a long time that have been untapped and uncured. So I think the good thing is that right now we are going to start to explore a new generation of medicines and things that we can do in the industry. So like people who wants to really be pioneers and try new things, this is a fantastic industry to be on. And also, like the thing with pharma is like the global mobility and the exposure that it give you to many different ways of growing your career. Like, for example, Alessandro, you're talking about a secondment in a different organization. And that's something that pharma is really good at, like creating that mobility and that learning of the skills beyond the boundaries of what is supposed to be your role, which I think it's a great retention exercise in itself. And I can think of many others, but those will be like my two main ones. That is like the opportunity to really be pioneers, and also like the opportunities to really grow your career in like 360 degrees, like in terms of global mobility, in terms of role, in terms of knowledge and skills.
And talking about skill, I think another interesting point that you raised, or that we've been reading, is around the more and more the way that companies are internally kind of developing their staff, you know, to reach the requirements of the company or of the field that they're being hired into, as opposed to basically maybe just recruiting massively in that specific field and kind of building that internal capacity. You know, how are you seeing that pan out in this hybrid world in terms of how that is being done? You know, are you seeing some challenges in doing that, or is everybody kind of happily embracing remote learning, or do you still see the value of face-to-face in some way?
I do see this as like a constant, like there's a spectrum of different possibilities. And of course, some fields of some departments, even within an organization, are more used to have this type of remote work or that type of gig economy that is more project-based, whereas some other areas of the organization may have a bit more resistance to different ways of working. So I think it's a continuum. I think where we are right now is just starting to really realize that we don't have to hire that much for experience about and what have people done, but much more about potential and what can people do, right? So this is this shift from we're hiring people with these 5 years of experience on these fields to look for people who have these skills that can help us grow. Because as I was mentioning, we're going into an unknown territory. We're going to be transforming the industry in many ways. So we need pioneers. We don't need like people who know the way, because there's no way to follow. So I think that's definitely going to impact a lot of things in the upcoming years in terms of how do we look at job descriptions, do we look at compensation, how do we look about the work that we are defining for people, and really started to create some kind of internal talent marketplace or internal gig economy that will allow us to really allow people to choose what they want to do with their time, which it's going to be a shift. It's coming. We are really at the beginning, but definitely it's going to transform how we think about work.
Great, and I think diving into the unknown, I think, is a great transition to my next question to Ben. As the pandemic hit and all of a sudden everybody started having to work remotely, it was a big unknown for everybody. So maybe reflecting back on that initial transition and the kind of approach that was taken within your organization to ensure that everybody still remained connected, and what are some of the examples of good practice that you've seen kind of naturally come up because just the way that people like to interact with each other, but also things that maybe you've had to implement more from like a top-down perspective to ensure that some of the development opportunities, the informal kind of meet and greets and things are maintained, and have you seen challenges in people latching onto that? So maybe just some thoughts there.
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we realized pretty early on in pandemic was that people really desire connectivity, right? And it sounds very obvious, but it was surprising how quickly people who enjoyed working home pre-pandemic for 1, 2, 3 days a week, suddenly being forced to do it 5 days a week, people were really struggling from a resilience perspective of not having that same connectivity, that same belonging. And what it drove us to do was look at how differently people work when they work remotely than when they do in the office. People tend to be much more task focused when they're at home. A lot of people talk about the efficiency of completing tasks when they're at home. And that's why working is fantastic for a good number of roles, because it allows you to kind of mix between the types of work that you're doing. We saw that small groups very quickly kind of found ways to connect. So they very quickly identified that to retain that connectivity, they were going to need to put some time in the calendars to all get together and have a session, not necessarily an outcome-focused meeting, but have a session where people just connected with each other. They talked with each other as they would do naturally sat next to each other in an office. The piece that we saw needing more of a top-down approach was the broader connectivity that is part of allowing people to network more effortlessly across an organization. So what we have done within our organization is create opportunities that kind of force some of those accidental collisions that you get in an office, where you have two people who are, or more people who are not necessarily working on a common goal, but come into contact with each other either through sitting, in close proximity, or they're talking at the water cooler, whatever it may be, and they're absolutely essential for people's network and broader network within any large organization. And for anybody who's kind of early on in career thinking around about how they approach their career development, the network is clearly a really, really important part of that. So what we've tried to do is create those opportunities to bring random groups of people together, or seemingly random groups of people together, to just share a bit about themselves, share a bit about the work that they do, nothing formal, really just around making connections rather than having anything that's too short-term outcome focused. So that we've driven across the organisation. We did it when everybody was working fully remotely. We've retained it actually because it was something that people found value in as we've moved to a hybrid working way of working. We've decided to keep the informal sessions together, and also recognising what I said at the start around how differently people work in the office versus working at home, and recognising, particularly for people who are leading others, the importance of spending time on stuff that is less obviously task focused and more around connectivity, more around making sure that there is connectivity across the teams, also making sure that there's focus on culture and driving some of the more cultural strategic pieces across the organisation.
I mean, I think a lot of fantastic thoughts there, a lot to unpack. Maybe, definitely around the resiliency piece, and maybe probably was quite a challenge also from a leadership perspective to differentiate the needs of everyone, because somebody with a young family will have very different need with somebody living in a shared accommodation in London, somebody in maybe a more comfortable countryside kind of place. So I think that's an interesting discussion there. But I think as we moved into a hybrid environment, I think again that gives people the flexibility. So not necessarily as well, actually building on from that, now that there's this hybrid environment, what are some practices that you seem to try to encourage those interactions in an office environment? Because obviously by having a hybrid model, there might be opportunities to come in, but how do you time those with specific needs? How do you continue building that now that people might not be always coming in at the same time? Are you seeing some best practices that are coming out in that space?
Yeah, and there's definitely balance, right? So you've seen some organisations have taken a very firm approach and said, we expect people in the office 3 days a week, 4 days a week, what have you. Some have left it very open and have been less concerned, honestly, with presence in the office. As it happens, this webinar falls on one of our come to site days. So within my organisation, we have been encouraging people just once a month to make sure that we have a pretty low bar in terms of flexibility for people, and recognising that no date will suit everybody. But we've started with at least once a month where we ask everybody to come onto site if they can, to get together and make sure that they are getting to know their colleagues. Particularly, given that we spent a good amount of time where nobody was even able to get onto site in some of our territories around the world. There are people who've worked together for a year plus who'd never met each other. And it's a really valuable opportunity to get different parts of the organisation in the same place, doing some of that natural sharing. The balance comes with making sure that we're taking advantage of the hybrid approach, where we're appreciating the needs that people have across the organisation for flexibility. I think if you try to be too rigid and insist on 2 days a week or 3 days a week, there is a risk that will be somewhat challenging for some people. Everybody has different needs, and so you've got to strike that balance between making sure there's enough people in your office environment to make sure it's worthwhile for people to want to come in, without enforcing something that actually is going to be too inflexible for a workforce that increasingly expects and desires a high level of flexibility.
Maybe just last thought before we move on to Esther, but based on some of my personal experience, at least, I was lucky, I guess, to start my journey, my professional journey pre-pandemic. So was very much kind of able to experience those informal learning opportunities of maybe some more senior colleagues just literally dragging me into a call or a meeting, and kind of me being able to sit there and absorb mannerisms or kind of conversations and these kind of very untangible kind of learning opportunities that are very hard to replicate in a fully kind of virtual environment, right? So there's definitely an element of ownership in your own development in there. So you need to kind of seek out those opportunities to some extent. But there's also a challenge in terms of like out of sight, out of mind. So how are you maybe using some of these come to site days to try to perpetuate some of these good practices of trying to encourage maybe more senior staff to kind of welcome more junior staff into some of the more high level conversations or challenging kind of issues?
So there's a lot around how you spend your time. So I talked a bit about how work is different when you're working remotely from when you're working on site. One thing we've been really trying to encourage line leaders to do is when they come onto site to try and free up as much of their time as possible, so that they are more available, recognizing that actually exactly what you've just said, Ali, right? Some of your kind of good development experiences have been through an informal interaction with a leader who's either been able to, excuse me, either been able to share an experience or has been able to pull you into something that they were, you know, they kind of wanted a different view on. It's really strong development, but can only be done when you've got leadership who are available. So I think probably the key thing that we've done is when we've had the come to site days, we've really encouraged all of our leaders to free up as much of the calendar as possible. And where they have got meetings, to try and make sure they're focused on meetings with people who are actually in the same location.
That's great. That's great. And I think the location element of thing is maybe a good transition to our final panelist and some kind of thoughts from Esther. So I kind of want to take your perspective, especially of somebody who works in a, you know, as we've heard from both Lara and Ben, somebody who works in a global industry, you know, our global industry, but maybe has a more limited footprint in especially in the African continent, right? So how have you maybe seen some of the opportunities that COVID brought, in the sense of everything kind of being very remote, and all of a sudden, you know, there are more opportunities because of this remote nation, either to attend conferences as a student or to participate in kind of more webinars, et cetera. You know, what are some of your experiences of that the early development phase that maybe happened during COVID in Africa or in Kenya or whatever kind of area that you kind of have interacted in?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for the question. And I think just from my perspective and just thinking about where I came from and based on my experience, I actually came into the industry, you know, stuck when COVID happened. So it was very interesting because all my life and all through my school life, you know, it was very physical. I mean, we went to school physically. So many things were done physically. And so just the change of environment to remote working was a very foreign idea, at least for my cohort. And so we got into a place where, you know, remote work was the norm, or people working in shifts was the norm. And for those of us who left school, you know, with an eagerness to meet your supervisor physically. And so, you know, there's this virtual space that seemed very unreal, seemed very, I think the unreal, you know, seemed very, very far from reality. And so that's something we had to really grapple with initially. There were so many, what do I call it, like sessions for mentorship that we looked forward to that we were not able to, you know, just that physical interaction that I think Ben talked about, that human beings naturally crave for, because we're just social beings and we appreciate the physical more. But I think over the years now, as I'm just transitioning into the opportunities that arose, so many things, I think things like learning opportunities that we found online. And I think it really just had to change our mind perception about interaction. Whereas we were very focused on a physical interaction, I think now we've come to learn that we can actually utilize technology and remote work and still foster a lot of interaction and collaboration between teams. And I think also just depending on the team and who your team head was, we realized that there needed to be more intentionality, you know, from the team lead, you know, to ensure that they are, you know, don't really focus on the technical aspects of the job, but, you know, there was just that going out of your way to include topics that are not necessarily work-based, but just to try and foster, you know, just that warmth and the interaction, because without that, I think the learning opportunities that we would look, you know, we were anticipating, you know, would not have been met. And I think other opportunities for young people that arose is that very many young people, the government, I know when COVID struck, there was just an additional workforce, whether in terms of communicators of COVID, whether in terms of, young people to add on to the workforces to fight COVID. I got a sense that the government and, other organizations looked at young people as, as having the energy and the drive. And I think someone you had mentioned trusted workforce, to just pipe out the information there. And I just think the agility with technology and social media worked to our advantage as young people. And so I think those were some of the new opportunities that I think arose out of COVID for we the young people. CMEs, so continuous medical education. For us, majorly they're all physical, I mean, if I can remember from 2019 and before, but now so many other, CMEs are being held virtually, and we're able to apply and get CPD, continuous professional development points in that sense. So I think that's also a really nice opportunity that arose from COVID-19. And I just think just to stress on the strategic focused networking that grew through social media, I think that for me was just one of the biggest gains and opportunities that arose, at least in the lower middle income countries, of which I am a part of. So, yeah.
I mean, I think that's a fantastic experience, and I think a lot of people on that have joined the call today will probably resonate with that experience of transitioning from the studying and the kind of university time to a workforce during the kind of last couple of years. So it's been a weird transition for people joining the workforce at this point. I think I found it really interesting your point about these new opportunities that arose during COVID for young people because of just the requirements that this hybrid environment brought up. Lara mentioned the digital natives element of some of the younger generations. And what I'm wondering now is, okay, it was very clear at the time of COVID that was essentially the only way to do business, to work, to kind of interact, etc. As we're moving out of this pandemic, essentially, where maybe there's more, we're going back to face-to-face meetings, we're going back to face-to-face interactions in the workplace, etc. Do you see that some of those opportunities are now kind of going away, or are they remaining? And I think that's an interesting maybe perspective, especially in a lower middle income country where, as you said, maybe there were opportunities, but now do you still see those opportunities in your environment or not?
Yeah, I think I do still see them. I'd say the physical activities have increased, but the remote work and the hybrid work has also been maintained. So for example, so many team building activities still happen in organization. So I know one that does something called Thank God It's Friday, every Friday, so everybody comes to, I don't know, some team building place, and they just have all these fun and activities, and that was actually picked out during the online remote work. So every Friday they had this online virtual hub where everybody would join in and just play games. But now that things have opened up, then they've shifted that to physical, but while still just retaining remote work. So I think so many organizations are while just increasing the physical presence of their employees within organization, they complement it with the online, because I think, to be honest, online work favored so many people, as we've had before, and even just young people. I feel like sometimes when I work remotely, I have more time on my hands. I save so much time on commutes that I would, the commuting, etc., and I'm more productive when I'm at home. So I just think I was very productive during my online remote work, and I just don't think I speak for myself and also just other people. So just complementing that and the physical interactions, I think as I see that has been carried forward. And I think we're just really trying to appreciate the value that remote work, did to LMICs. So, yeah.
That's very helpful. And I think maybe I want to bring all three of you back into the conversation. I think we heard a lot today about productivity and how maybe some of these elements of kind of hybrid working, et cetera, impacted productivity. And I want to kind of wrap it into that element of productivity, but also development and kind of opportunities to grow your career. Because one thing is obviously doing your job as required and kind of, you know, completing your tasks and kind of making sure everything that needs to be done, it gets done. But then the other element of it is those interactions, et cetera, that we've discussed already. So what are maybe some of, you know, do you have as professionals, as leaders, as whatever your role you want to take during this call, any kind of fears or concerns of kind of trends that you're seeing now, that if maybe they continue, it will lead in some gaps or some challenges in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, whatever. So happy to go, and whoever wants to come in first.
So if I might, I guess my biggest fear is around a sense of belonging. I think one thing that we still haven't perhaps got or recovered from in terms of pre-COVID versus post-COVID pandemic is the sense of belonging. So I think probably a lot of people on the call will be aware of the big resign, and there's all sorts of different reasons behind the big resign that happened across industries through the back end of kind of remote working pandemic or enforced remote working. I think a big piece of that is the sense of belonging that people have to their teams. And it worries me slightly that the less time people spend together, and the more task focused they are when they spend time together, actually there's less of a belonging. And that is it's the amount of time we spend at work is huge, right? So you want to be part of something that you belong to and something that you're happy belonging to. So I think the connectivity piece and that sense of belonging for me is something that we still need to make sure we're putting a lot of focus on as organizations.
And maybe to just expand a little bit on that. I mean, do you see a difference in terms of career stages and the kind of input that is required by leadership to kind of build that sense of belonging? I mean, do you see differentiation, or is it maybe the same for somebody who's been at the company for 20 years as somebody who's been in the company for 1?
So I think you're more naturally going to have a sense of connectivity that the longer you've been somewhere, right? But I think it's a concern that I have around people who've been in the organization, you know, a few months or a good number of years. I think there's still that sense of belonging that we need to make sure people have got to their teams. You know, it obviously helps foster teamwork, but also from a retention perspective as well. So I think probably more of a focus, more of a concern for people who are younger in career or people who've been, you know, with the organization a short space of time, but equally not something you can take for granted as you may have done historically, because it was just a natural connectivity for people who've been in the organization a long time.
Thanks, Ben. Any other? Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think my biggest fear and is about hybrid workforce and what you guys were mentioning about out of sight, out of mind, because we know that like in the case of remote work or hybrid workforce, like in many cases, like women are taking more advantage because of their role as main caregiver for the family, right? Like the traditional role that the women have had, and therefore I'm a bit concerned about how that may play out. If let's say that most of the people working remotely are women and they're out of sight, how that's going to impact like promotion rates and like big career development opportunities that may not be taken into account for people working remotely. So that's a concern that I have, and I will definitely make sure that we use data to track that that's not happening in this new context. But I think that's something to have very, very present. And I think my other concern is around innovation too. What Ben was mentioning, like when you have people together in a room, there's a kind of an energy that generates a lot of brain power that may not be achieved in a mostly remote environment. So that task orientation may be against innovation and creating new things. So definitely that's my concern as well.
Yeah, I think for me, my concern, and also just as a young people in the profession, is just acquiring those soft skills that you otherwise, wouldn't acquire, by reading a book or something, just being in that presence where there's so many things I would learn from my supervisor or, my manager, just by observing how they do what they do, how they speak, how they dress, just very, very tiny things that I think that are very critical for the growth, in your profession. I think I see and I fear that that's going to be a really big scare, such that 20 years from now, we're going to have grown-ups in the profession. But I think the behavior, is going to be very different from, the seniors who are before us. And I just really wanted to chime in on Ben's point about connectivity. I know that I think for me, my personality really thrives around people. I honestly, like, when I feel like I'm low, I thrive, in social places and spaces. And so I find that, closed spaces are very confining. So I'd be happier and I'd feel more connected, working in a hybrid, I'd say, than working totally remote. So yeah, that was my comments.
Yeah, and I think that your comments about soft skill and kind of picking those things informally, not only from maybe just your boss, but if you're in an office environment, you might be sitting next to, a completely different team that you never interact with, but you hear conversations and you hear the mannerisms of those conversations. And I think that, and you're like, ooh, that's weird. I've never heard that kind of interaction before. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Then you might go to your manager and ask them about it, right? So I think there's definitely a sense of just that broader involvement, or when you go down to the canteen and cafeteria and kind of hear these interactions that, in a professional environment, but are outside of your just immediate role, right? And I think that's maybe a challenge for younger professionals, depending on the role that you have, that your scope within the organization, especially in very big organization, at least maybe in my personal perspective, is that it's very narrow. I mean, you maybe interact with a small group of individuals immediately around you, and that's about it. And obviously, to do your day-to-day role in a hybrid environment, that works fine, and everybody knows exactly who you are, where you are, etc. But it's a kind of -3, -4 kind of wider picture thing that maybe is something that becomes a gap, and that links up with the connectivity element. But maybe I think we can start opening it up for Q&A. I think we have a nice group there, and there's already a great question from Michaela, who's one of our colleagues here at IFPMA, and actually maybe we can unmute Michaela and you can ask your question directly. I think we can do that. So since we're not that many in the call, it'd be nice to just hear some more voices.
Alessandro, thanks so much, and really enjoying following the conversation and the contributions across the set of excellent and really thoughtful panelists. My question is around kind of the blurring of lines between the professional and the personal lives that we have, and we talk a lot about life-work balance, but something we recently heard is we should just talk about life, and work is only hopefully a small part of the rest of our lives. But during the pandemic, we had our cameras on often showing glimpses, and sometimes embarrassing glimpses and sometimes very intimate glimpses into our personal lives, but also brought our work home with us, and that led to other effects as well. So I'm wondering from each of the panelists how they've managed this in terms of an organizational discussion or individually as well, and how young people also might expect that to impact their work and rather their lives in the future. Thanks.
And thanks, Michaela. And again, if anybody else who's attending the call would either like to ask a question, you can type it, or please raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can ask it to the panel. But so please, if Lara, I see you mouth. So
yeah, I think I have two thoughts on that. I think there is one around authenticity. Because to your point, we have seen people like with their kids, with their dogs, with their pets, with everything, right? And like I have a piano here on the background. You may kind of see like a silhouette of that. So it really, I think, has created a different dimension of authenticity in some context, which I think is refreshing and welcome. To your point, sometimes it has been very invasive as well, right? Like And also like for the limits of life, the boundaries of like there's no time anymore because everybody's at home, so you can just call me at 8 p.m. because I have nothing better to do tonight, right? So that was a bit challenging to manage, and I think like we need to reset the expectation a bit as well about the boundaries. But also, I think it depends. Like I work globally, so sometimes I take a call at 8 p.m. and I'm happy because I don't have to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, or I can I'm a night owl. Like I rather prefer to work at night in certain cases because it helps me to think much more. So I was able to maybe sleep till like 9 a.m. and then I just like take a quick shower and jump into my next call, and I'm fine. So I think it's trying to control that a bit and making sure that you know yourself, you know your boundaries, and you communicate those to the people that work with you, so we can make the most of the flexibility without being intrusive.
I think you raise a lot of really good points, and it kind of the thing that sprung into my mind while you were talking was that the need to be understanding as an organization that different people have different solutions here, right? So I think we need to be really careful and much more proactive in our thinking than we were historically around what flexibility means for people. So you will see people working at very odd hours. That could be because of what you've just described, right? Which is that it works really well for you because the alternative means, you know, something less sociable on another day. And it could be that you're taking the time, you know, midway through the day when ordinarily and historically you'd been in an office, so you couldn't. Or it could be that actually your work-life balance is not something that's working well for you right now. So you're doing the really early calls and the really late calls because you're available to do them because your work is at your home. So I think the importance of managers taking a proactive interest in how their teams are using flexibility and making sure that they are using it from a perspective that is healthy for them is really, really important. And it's something that I think historically, as I say, you could have seen if you saw somebody was in the office from early in the morning to late at night, you'd automatically think, actually, we probably need to have a conversation there about whether this is really working for them. Actually, it's much more difficult to do now because a really early call and a really late call could be working really well for somebody. They could be taking a big break in the middle of the day, which is absolutely fine, so long as it works from a business perspective. So for me, there's a need to be really proactive around how leaders are talking to their folks around flexibility.
And maybe you know, as this is Youth Day and the kind of the focus is on development and kind of conversations around how to engage the youth of our industry. You know, we're talking about the way that people kind of relate and learn by seeing other things done. You know, it's one thing telling somebody who's just new to an organization, yeah, it's fine for you to kind of, as long as it fits with your needs and you're ticking your boxes, it's fine for you to go for a run or go to the gym for an hour and a half between 1 and 2 p.m. That, you know, no problem. But then if they don't see anyone else doing it, or because of the hybrid environment, there's just, you don't even have an awareness if somebody might be doing it, right? How are you kind of, what is the solution to kind of enable that? And do you see that people are naturally doing it, or do you need to prompt people? And have you seen maybe an evolution of that over the last couple of years with the pandemic? I mean, after things opened up.
So I'd say there's definitely a mix, right? I think there's people for whom, you know, they've got a very strong perspective on work-life balance and have been very aware of the potential for work to erode life as we've been in pandemic. I think what can you do about it is being talking, giving the message, and B, sharing where people are walking the talk, right? So it's kind of talking about personal experience of when you've, you know, when you've done exactly what we've just talked about. You may have done a particularly early call because you needed to be on with China or Japan, that actually you've then blocked out a couple of hours later on in the day in the middle of the UK or US working day in order to get some stuff done in your life that you know you're able to do during the middle of the day that perhaps you weren't at the very start. So I think it's a mixture. I think talking and sharing experiences for me.
I mean, I totally agree that it's a mixture. And I think just speaking from the young person's perspective, I think this has really taught me early, to some work ethic, just the individually owning, because of course your manager can be on your back 24/7 to account for your hours. But I think just that taking initiative on your own, just know that, okay, these are my hours of work. This is how flexible I can be. This is how, and, just communicating that very openly, I think also with your supervisors. I think that has been an added advantage for me, I think, because it's really developed a sense of self-discipline and a sense of my own initiative. Also just, being careful not to misuse something that I think has been graciously given to me. So I see it as an opportunity and really personal challenge. I don't know what organizations and managers can do over the top, but I think it's a mix, and just depending on people's characters and what they deem valuable and what they, what they hold dear and what they want to gain from it. I think that's all that matters. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think a key message definitely is as an individual, as a professional, you need to take ownership of not only your own development, but of the conversations that you're having with your environment. And I think, as Ben was saying, the Great Resignation and all these issues that we've seen in not only in our industry but across the workspace. There's a lot to be said about people just walking the talk and literally walking if things don't work for them. So I think there's that element of accountability, right? And you needing to kind of understand what your needs are, but also vocalizing them, because people can't guess. And I think that's something that is quite important. I see another question has popped up. Sophie has asked, and I don't know if we can unmute Sophie, or if that's too challenging, maybe I'll just ask. Oh, yeah, there we go. There we go. Hi, Sophie.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for the great conversation. There is definitely a lot to unpack. My question is really about how did you convince your managers and colleagues, even young colleagues, to block, let's say, 1 hour every week, so during Fridays, or at another time to exchange and chat. I have found it challenging, even with young people, to say, oh, let's grab coffee once a month for 1 hour. People always say, oh, I'm too busy in the end, sorry. And if you have any tips about that, I would welcome it. Thank you.
So I guess my first response to that is walking the talk, right? So I think if you have senior leaders within an organization taking the time to block time out of calendars to spend time with their teams, not talking about projects or particular initiatives, but spending time with teams, I think that goes a long way. If you're sat in an organization and you see leaders at various different levels throughout that organization really investing time in team discussion, making sure that the people are getting to know each other across the organization, then I think it's an obvious driver for people to take the individual initiative as well.
Totally agree with Ben. The role modeling that as leaders we need to do in the organization is critical for this, and also sharing a bit about what are we doing for our own connections and our own networking. And something that I just realized coming back to the office, I look around and there are many faces I have never seen, because maybe people that joined when I was remote. So I'm just making a point of, I'm just gonna ask this person who they are, so I can actually start to expand my network and maybe set an example so we can create much more of that connection in a more organic way. So yeah, I think it's to Ben's point, it's just walking the talk.
Yeah, and I just think to add on to that, I think it's a culture that you create in your company, and also believe in, even if you're two people who show up, just make some noise about it. I mean, I think the company should provide that space to say, yeah, there was a catch up and, it was really fun. And I think when people start to see that, there's fear of missing out, especially about, among young people. And the next time, it's 3, it's 4. I just think it's a process. And if there's no culture like that in your company, may take a while, but I think it's worth the while. It's an investment that I think pays off in the end. So yeah, make noise about it, I guess. Yeah.
Thanks, Esther. We have we have one question in the chat, which is from Wendy, and then we have Minhas. Sorry, Minhas, who has his or her. Sorry, apologies. Their hand raised. Maybe if we can unmute both, get both questions, and then do like a rapid fire response for our panelists before giving the floor to Sophie for her final remarks. So is Wendy able to speak? Okay, if not, okay, yeah, maybe Wendy, if you can go first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for an engaging session. My question was more regarding advice on how those, especially early on in their career, could, find career development opportunities, and also how to like introduce that and have those conversations with your managers. Great
question, Wendy. And it has?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you again for this wonderful discussion. I'm very curious about, a lot has been said about cross-functional teams and moving to like uncharted territories in this healthcare industry. I was wondering, how do you manage cross-functional teams within your organization? Because while it's important to have people from different perspectives, it then sometimes results into everybody needs to like vote for something to get done, or sometimes there could be also cases of turf and analysis paralysis. So what mechanisms do you have to avoid where the situation of endless discussion and actually, driving things forward quickly, because this industry requires innovation fast and things need to be implemented fast? Thanks.
Great question. So maybe, Esther, I'll come to you for Wendy's question, because I think you're the best place to kind of talk about how you seek advice from managers, being a young professional. So maybe why don't you jump in there with a very quick answer, then maybe one quick thought up for Mina's question on cross-functional team and kind of engagement there, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, yeah, sure. How I communicate with my managers about these things is that first of all, I do it respectfully and I just do it openly. If you're scared, I think I have to convince myself that they're human beings, and I just need to go respectfully and just be very clear. So how you package it, I think, really matters. But I think, just saying that, this is what I honestly believe in: open communication, just as long as it doesn't seem too forceful or disrespectful. I think managers are human beings, and they're able to understand that, yeah, you deserve career development, and this is how I can support you. So that's my quick response really to Wendy. And I don't know if that helps. It seems like, something anyone else would tell you, but I think just open communication. And I really hope that your organization has an open door policy like mine does. So I find it very easy to just walk in and say that, yeah, this is what I think is a problem, and they really do support me. I would be happy to hand over the next question to the other panelists.
Yeah, maybe just very quickly, 20 seconds each. It's maybe slightly off topic with the rest of the thing, but I think it links in nicely with kind of expanding your network element of things. So maybe one quick thought from either Ben or Laura, and then we can hand over to Sophie.
So in terms of avoiding, I think the term was analysis paralysis. For me, with any cross-functional team or any line function team, if you've got a discussion to have, you need to be clear what the decision is and who the decision maker is. And Ali, you're at GSK, right? You'll understand that. But for me, that's really, really important to make sure that the discussion adds value to the broader organization.
Great. Maybe, unless Laura, you have any burning remarks, we'll leave it there. Okay. Well, thanks very much, everybody. I think it's been a fantastic conversation. I'm sure we could spend many more hours talking about it. But maybe now, Sophie, thanks for joining us. And I know you've been listening in the background. So I don't know if you have any wise or maybe not so wise remarks or challenges to ourselves and the panelists about what you've heard here today, and to share with our audience.
Thanks, Alessandro, and thanks to the panelists for great insights today, and for the questions also from the audience. Really interesting discussion so far. So I'm Sophie Mellis. I'm the HR director and also responsible for ethics and compliance at IFPMA. And I'm happy just to wrap the webinar up today. I don't know if it's going to be wise. My name, Sophie, means wise in Greek. So let's see how far I go. But it is my sincere belief that in today's labor market, employers must do everything they can to keep their employees engaged and committed to their jobs. And that means investing in their career development and providing a growth perspective, as you all have discussed already today. But look at the numbers, and I really think they don't lie, because, for example, Salesforce 2021 survey of US knowledge workers found out that more than 70% of the respondents said that an increased investment in learning and development programs would make them more productive and engaged. And another 66% said that such an investment would make them more likely to stay with their company. And that goes back to what you have been discussing in terms of retention as well. So just wanted to start with that. And then another thought is really, but you already have touched on that, development is so much more than formal training. And still many people, I don't know if it's young people or people in general, but many people still believe that the only way to go is formal training courses, right? If they fill in their individual development plans at the end of the year for the year to come, they think about off-the-shelf courses on time management, leadership skills, or managing conflicts, and you name it. But in a hybrid role especially, one really needs to get creative and think out of the box. And that's why more than ever, we need to embrace informal training and learning opportunities, of which there are so many. And as Alessandro is showcasing in person at IFPMA, we offer a virtual hybrid secondments where an employee joins a member organization to work on specific projects for several weeks. I do believe it's better to do it in hybrid formats, not only virtually, and Alessandro has touched on that. Of course, for a trade association, these kind of models are easy to implement because we have a big membership where we can just swap employees for a certain amount of time. But I do think that also for biopharma companies or other companies, you could imagine doing a secondment, for example, with a supplier, a distributor, or another third party. You really could become creative. Or, and also this is something I think that is often forgotten, you could rotate jobs within the company. For example, maybe someone always wanted to learn about ethics and compliance. I'm just saying that because that's my second role. But why not check, right? If you could join the ethics and compliance team for 3 months, let's say, and do a project there. And then finally, also, you can do a lot of job enrichment in your own role, because oftentimes there are calls for people to join, for example, a special project or an event that needs to be organized, and there is no one to really take care of that. So I'd say jump on these kind of opportunities as a learning moment. You can learn so many things: project management, creative thinking, budget control, you name it. And it really looks great on your CV. So to conclude, I believe that an organization should allow each employee to tailor their learning and development to their unique career development goals. And I think the panelists have touched on that a lot. To achieve this, I think Ben in particular mentioned it's really key to schedule one-on-one time with your supervisor to keep on discussing these development goals and review the progress and be proactive about it. Because it's not only going to come from the supervisor, it also needs to be owned by the employee themselves. And with that, I would like to conclude my remarks. Thank you, Alessandro, for providing the opportunity, and thanks again to the panel for the great webinar. I don't know, Alessandro, if I hand back to you.
No, I mean, we're at time. Again, thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully it was useful. Make sure you connect with us on LinkedIn or other social media platforms to look at what other activities Hyper's got going on, and talking about those informal opportunities. Hyper is a great one to kind of get involved. So looking forward to hearing from you more, and thanks very much. Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your days.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.